Hey friends, Brian Douglas here, B Dougie, and here to talk about insights into Vite's open source contributions. So let me go ahead and just jump right in. All right, so Brian Douglas, as I mentioned, open source is the product that actually I've been working on. It's been open source for the longest time, and we're about to launch our first sort of productized platform. It'll be free for folks who want to engage with it, but happy to have a conversation that I'll get into that in a bit later. Cool. So quickly, I want to actually talk about my intro to open source. It was back in 2015. I'd been writing code for a couple of years at that point, but never really contributed to open source until I had this problem where I needed to auto invite people to my Slack community. At the time, Slack was very, very new, and you had to manually invite people through email to your community. It was very, very hard. But I ended up solving the problem through open source. I found a GitHub repo that and an npm package basically to solve my issue. Actually, to be honest, it wasn't even an npm package, just a GitHub repo. And not knowing how to do open source or use GitHub, I reached out to the maintainer directly, found their email on their profile, and this is the email, and reached out and asked, hey, I don't know how to use your thing. Could you help me figure out how to get this thing to run locally? To my surprise, they responded pretty quickly on the weekend and got me unblocked. And from that point, I just never stopped using open source, doing open source. And what the kicker is that this entire time, this maintainer was actually traveling in Thailand, following a K-pop artist. Not even sure who it was, to be honest, because I didn't know what K-pop was. I also didn't know what a digital nomad was at the time. And I learned all that through this one conversation. So open source, that's the thing I've been working on for full time for the past 3 months. Super happy to finally start talking about this and sharing this with the world. We've been working on this bootstrapping it for the past 2 years. Bootstrapping is basically it's been an open source project while I was working full time at GitHub. And it really, I built it for the reason of that experience, but also this quote, which is a Gucci Mane quote. Gucci Mane is the godfather of trap music. And he did this interview where he was talking about how to have this sort of secret sauce. And if you don't got sauce, then you lost, which he was talking in context about being a trap artist. In the context of open source, it's just as similar. So whether you're a big wig like myself, who's chief sauce officer, B Dougie at Open Sauce, or you're just a contributor looking for your first time contribution, knowing what the sauce is or knowing how to contribute is usually the blocker. And sometimes we do it wrong, and sometimes we walk away from open source. But my hope is that I can encourage more people to do open source by just providing them insights into how to do it. So early last year, I actually talked to Evan during Open Source Friday when I was at GitHub, specifically about Vite. And from that one conversation, I was so excited about Vite that we actually converted all of open source to use Vite. So we were on Webpack using Create React app from years ago. We had ejected a long time ago, but converted that all over to Vite, and it's been a pretty good experience. We've been growing up with the community as Vite has kind of advanced and evolved. So yeah, we figured out things like server-side rendering and everything like that. I probably should have a blog post on that. We have a PR open right now to merge some extra fixes. But yeah, always happy to talk shop if you all want to join our Discord and community or hit me up on Twitter. Happy to share. Cool. So also, this is a Dev2 post from a contributor who did most of that work for the project. Cool. So the new thing we've been working on for the past 3 months is open source insights dashboard. And it's really to compare projects to project. It's something that you can't do on GitHub today. You can't compare project to project. But we also want to find whether projects are actually taking contribution or whether projects need contribution. This is stuff that is sort of raise the red flag. It doesn't exist currently in the ecosystem, and we're trying to solve that through a number of features. And we're also open to the chat if you have any ideas as well. So my notion of getting open source is I wanted to get involved. I wanted to contribute, and I think there's a lot of cool things that Hacktoberfest in October, which happens every October. It encourages first-time contributors to contribute, but usually it's a lot of rah, and not a lot of insightfulness of how to contribute or where to get started. There is a lot of documentation and events around that. But we wanted to really set the stage for actually knowing how the Hacktoberfest is performing, but also how your project's performing during Hacktoberfest if you choose to opt in. So we built this dashboard with insights.opensauce.pizza. It should have an S there after insights. So apologies on that, but what I'm getting at is that we want to identify things like spam, participation, like things that are getting labeled or not labeled, and encouraging maintainers to use some of these tools on GitHub to help organize their project. There's a popular talk from the ViteConf a couple years ago from Brandon Roberts about how do you even set your project up if you don't want a contribution? And a lot of even maintainers don't even have that set up so that way when people walk in there, it feels like you're spamming, or you maybe are spamming the maintainer when clearly you could just state certain things to say we're not taking contributions. So we're going to ship some other features in the future around that concept, but for now, we're shipping the Hacktoberfest dashboard, and eventually to merge this into custom dashboards for maintainers and companies to manage their open source. So got some ideas. Some things that you could potentially do today outside of open source is have a triage team. So if you want contributor, if you want to grow community, triage team is a really, really good pathway forward. It's something we started doing in open source to actually onboard new contributors and grow some of our ecosystem is by just getting people just to label issues and comment on stuff and make sure people are doing the right thing as far as filling in the template, the issue form template. We actually took it from the Express team, so feel free to take it from us if you like. We do have a guide inside our .github README. The other thing is that we actually, during Hacktoberfest last year, we created this GitHub action to enforce linked issues. So you can't make a contribution to our projects without having an issue open first. Now, sometimes we get PRs without that issue. Highly recommend using this sort of pattern to enforce or at least reduce spam. So if you don't know about linked issues, definitely check it out. I'm sure, I've never contributed to Vite, so I don't know if y'all are using that or not. But this is the GitHub action. Definitely check it out. This sort of pitch, plug. Would love for more people to use that. I didn't actually create it. I encouraged one of our contributors to make it a GitHub action, and it now lives on the GitHub marketplace. So definitely check it out. But did want to talk about the Insights platform. So this is the sort of rounding up my slides and want to talk about this as a whole. Insights at OpenSauce.pizza. It came down to the path of I knew how to do. I originally built open source, our original platform, for me to have a CRM for contributing to open source. I just want to know where I can contribute. I can track issues. I can then track contributors and find out who's actually folks I should reach out to based on frequency of contribution. This is all stuff I built for myself a couple years ago. I put a login in front of it and then was able to let other people use it as well. Our community grew around this one notion. But what I found out is like when you walk into a GitHub repo, you don't really get a good idea. Like this is the Insights tab. On the right is the dashboard for repos, and this is the contributor. So in my mind, I would think, oh, Evan, Patak, Anthony, Safi, those are the top contributors. Let me reach out to one of them and ask them a bunch of questions. And if you try to do it the same way I did it years ago, you're going to, one, it's probably going to be very annoying, to be quite blunt. But two, like you're approaching the entire problem wrong, because right off the bat, you're going to see in the contribution graph that I'm going to show is like Evan hasn't contributed regularly to Vite in quite some time. Like he's doing contributions, but it's not to the level that the other folks are. So like if you want answers about how to contribute or solve a problem, it's probably not even those four. It's probably somebody else in the community who's hanging out and answering questions in the forums. So what I'm getting at, it's like this data is not really useful for people who want to contribute. It's also not as useful for people who want to maintain as well. Like knowing how much deletions in a paragraph form, but also a bar chart, like what it's a 0, the 5, what does the 2 mean? There's a lot of challenges in what we're looking at here. The other thing is you look into the actual calendar view. A lot of people don't know you could actually highlight specific sections of the calendar, so you can just break it down to see what happened in that huge blob earlier. And I think that was actually Anthony did a bunch of contribution. I was looking at it earlier, but it gives you a high level view of like distribution of like where the work, but not who's doing the work. You can scroll down on this Insights tab and see who's doing the work. But again, there's like a lot of stuff left to the imagination of understanding like what this orange blob is. So this is Anthony's big chunk of contribution. There's a bunch of contribution here. Like how do we know what we're looking at? So what we've done in the Insights platform is we have this calendar view to be able to identify who's making contributions, and not in the representation of like a graph, but in a calendar view. So these are all representation of the last 30 days PRs that are opened. We can filter by open and close, but for now, these are all that open. And then right off the bat, you could check within the quadrants of this is 7 days, and every 7 days or every week, you can see what contributions look like. So everything that's open for the past more than 30 days, there's currently nothing open right now. There's stuff probably past 30 days, but within those last 10 days or last 7 days in a month, not many PRs were open that week, or not PRs are open and still open that week. So right off the bat, Safi, who's the person I have circled here, it's like a big question mark. Is this a high impact contributor? Is this a maintainer contributor? Like, this is all stuff that we want to identify for people who are just spectators of the project, but also we want to identify for people who are maintainers of the project, because every now and then you get a contributor who comes out of nowhere, or maybe they have a directive at their job that they need to contribute upstream or do a Friday open source thing. This is really exciting because now you can actually identify where someone's coming through with like really impactful work, or maybe they open up 14 PRs and fix 14 problems. Like, now you have eagle eyes view. Everyone in the community can now see this. So the question is this a bus factor? Like, anything over that 50% line means that the actual contribution is larger than the rest. So chances are that person probably should do docs, or probably should identify some sort of knowledge transfer to explain what's been done here. But when I actually break it down and click through, I can actually see that the change itself was a big dependency update. So a lot of files touch, probably a package.lock. I actually didn't click through to check what this is, but you can also see what other contributions happened in the last month. So just taking a look, some docs, a lot of bug fixes as well. So high impact individual. I'd love to know if Safi, if you're a contributor, I'll probably look this up after. I probably should have looked it up before I hit record. But what I'm getting at is, definitely impactful person here. Somebody I'd probably asking questions, looking for knowledge transfer, looking for maybe if I want to make some bug fixes as well. This person is identified as a bug master. Other things is that identifying files touch. So if you want to identify, so this is actually not from Vite. All the other context was from Vite. This is actually from Next.js because anyway, basically Next.js is using Webpack. I don't know why I had the screenshot here and not a Vite screenshot, so apologies on that. But what I'm getting at is identify what files have been changed inside that contribution. Then you can find out like, okay, is this maintenance? Is this a new feature? And on top of that, being able to have an eagle eyes view on just seeing what contributions were made in the last 30 days. So currently Safi has a bunch of bug fixes that are still opened. We do have some that emerged as well, but this now gives us opportunity to see where the distribution of work looks like. So if somebody is just doing a bunch of documentation or other things, you can see we've identified things like TypeScript changes. We have Markdown changes as well as part and the bottom here. So if someone is a documentation expert, we can now flag them and identify them as like, okay, these are folks who make these types of changes. We're looking to eventually do things like heuristics into like code owners. So if you have a monorepo or a package that has certain sections where people are experts in other sections, then it's an opportunity for us to identify that and generate code owner files on the fly. Something down the road in the future in our roadmap. The other things is like I mentioned, contributions of context, like identifying if this is maintenance or if it's a new feature. Like that's actually pretty valuable to see who's shipping the most features or who's shipping in the last release consistently. Like these are things that you just don't get anywhere. And we're hoping to make this free and public for a lot of projects as well. So other things is like identifying not just sort of types of changes, but like low risk, high risk. So if people are making high risk changes, these are people are touching multiple files at one time or making into multiple changes in the one release. Like if anybody's on the top, and this is actually a chart that we actually deprecated. So we don't have access to this to share this data yet, but we'll end up sharing this in a different form in the future. But identifying for high impact individuals in a project becomes extremely valuable. And like we look for, hey, we've got to ship something pretty quickly. Who's been high impact individuals in the project? Who's taking the most risk? How can we get them involved in like this next release or solving some bigger problems? And a lot of times as you enter a new project as a new contributor or a new maintainer, you might have been so focused on your contribution that now you have no idea who are the risk takers, who are the impactful individuals, and we're looking to give that insights to folks pretty easily. We are targeting companies as well, so companies have it's probably a better feature for a company because companies have people come in and out of a project without having knowledge coming in. Usually, open source you kind of grow into this position. But anyway, I guess what I'm getting at is we at Open Source, we want to be more than green squares. Like don't want to encourage contribution for the sake of contribution. We'd encourage the right contribution at the right time. So if somebody or a project is looking for contribution, we want to notice that. Like we want to identify that for folks. But also, if you're a maintainer, if you're just looking for folks who are contributing or bringing people back in the fold, we also want to make that really clear and easy to do. So I say all this. These are a bunch of ideas. I really would love to talk with the Vite folks. I've been chatting with Doc off and on for the past 6 months, really. And yeah, would love to share more with other folks on the team, other people in the Vue community or the React community. I know this is not just Vue specific. Would love your insights. So hit me up, bdougio on Twitter. And lastly, we do have a secret sauce podcast that we've been doing on YouTube, talking to open source maintainers and talking about their trajectory into open source and what they care about when it comes to insights. It's been super insightful. That's no pun intended. But really, it has been insightful for us to identify like opportunity for things that are problems that we can help solve through open source. I am bdougie. That's me on GitHub. Definitely hit the follow button for whatever reason. I'm not sure if that does anything anymore, but definitely hit me up. And just going to close out with if you don't got sauce, then you lost. Don't forget that. All right, y'all. Thanks.